There are two major kind of categories of block printing ink. Water-based ink, which is what I have on this side of the table, and oil-based ink, which is what I have on this side of the table. And today I thought I'd walk you through just a little bit of my experience when buying them, using them, the prints you can get out of them. I'm going to talk about three different brands. So Speedball, which is a water-based ink. Aqua Linoprint, which is by Schmincke. That's another water-based ink. And Cranfield Caligo Safe Wash Relief Inks, which is an oil-based ink. So first up, I'll talk a little bit about water-based inks. So water-based inks, they tend to be easier to get. If you're just going to the store, you're probably going to be able to find the Speedball brand. I can find them at a lot of craft or hobby stores, as well as art supply stores. The Schmincke brand, it's definitely harder to find. It's an artist quality. So you'll probably only find it at an art supply store, and not even all art supply stores, but Speedball, almost every craft store or art supply store I've seen those in, at least in Canada. The oil-based ink, it's definitely trickier to find. I don't necessarily find oil-based ink at every art supply store that I go to, although you can get often maybe different brands. This brand in particular, I have to order online, so it's definitely harder to find. I can't just, if I run out of, let's say, this Process Red, I can't just, pop to the store and get another tube. I have to put in an order. So let's talk a little bit about the color choices. So right now here I have all the blacks, but with Speedball, I have two colors, not because you can't get a lot of colors with Speedball, because you can get quite a few, but because I was taking a class, I needed two different colors, so I just picked these two. And then I ended up upgrading to different and trying different brands. So I never really expanded beyond this, but when I look at this in stores, there's usually a rack with a bunch of different colors. So you're going to be able to find lots of colors with Speedball. The downside of the Speedball colors is there's nothing labeling what pigments they actually use, so it's a bit of a guess when you're going to mix with them. This Schmincke brand, they actually label what pigments are used, so it's just like if you're buying a tube of artist quality paint, pigment PY154 is what they have for this permanent yellow. So you're going to be able to have a lot more control over your color mixing, and there's also a lot of the traditional colors that you would expect from an artist quality brand. So definitely with these, it's easier to find colors and have a lot more consistency with your mixing. Now between these two water-based inks, Speedball is going to be nice and affordable. I can't remember how much these larger tubes cost, but it really wasn't too much. This brand, a lot more expensive. I live in Canada. This is a European brand. It might be a lot less expensive in Europe, but this was a set. It was quite an expensive little set. I just bought it on a whim, thinking they'd be good to try to see if they were better quality than the Speedball. The answer to that question is yes, it's definitely better quality than the Speedball, and I'll talk a little bit about that throughout this video. But it is more expensive. These are tiny tubes because they were from a set. You can get larger tubes, but it just depends, particularly in North America, what you can find in the stores you have near you. Price-wise for the oil-based inks, it's more expensive. You're definitely limited with the choices that you have as well for what oil-based inks you have available to you. I know when I go to a hobby store or a craft store like Michael's, I'm definitely going to be able to find Speedball, but I'm not necessarily going to find any oil-based ink. At an art store, I can almost always find Speedball as well, but it just depends which of these other colors you can find, or sorry, not colors. Depends which of these artist quality versions that you're going to be able to find. And I have been able to find some Speedball oil-based inks at some of the stores. I haven't tried it, or I would talk about them today. But this brand, it's definitely trickier to find. and it's more expensive. There's not really any cheaper brands of the oil-based inks out there. The Speedball, I think, is on par price-wise with these. And these as well, these oil-based inks, they also have the pigment labeled right on them. So you have some nice consistent color mixing with them as well. And there's lots of colors available. I have a bunch of them because I've been printing with this brand for quite some time. These are all the tubes that I have. You can also get it in this tin as well for colors that you use a lot of, and I think you can even get a larger size tin than that. So let's talk about when you actually go to use these. So water-based ink is fantastic for certain reasons, and that reason, the big reason, is when you print it, a few minutes later, your print is going to be dry. You don't have to leave it laid out somewhere, waiting for it to dry, hoping that it's dry by the time you need it. It's going to dry really quickly. Downside of that is it can dry on your tools. It can dry on your inking plate. It can dry on your block. You're not going to be able to do a long printing session. You're going to be printing, a couple, maybe 3 prints, and then it's going to be drying up too much for you to be able to continue using it. That ends up being a pretty major roadblock for a lot of printmaking artists. You can get this Speedball ink retarder. I bought it. I didn't end up using it, but you can try that out. See if that helps and extends your working time. You're going to find with either of these water-based brands, it's definitely a thinner consistency. If you're used to using an oil-based ink, it's going to take a little bit of time for you to kind of adjust to using and understanding that thinner consistency and how that applies to your block and the outcome on your prints. The other major advantage of water-based inks is super easy to clean up. You just use water. So you can just rinse everything off, maybe use soap if you want, but not necessary. So you're not going to have a whole lot of issues with cleanup. That means it's great for beginners. I also use it for test prints. So if I've been working on carving a block and I just want to see, is it done? I can just do a quick rollout of water-based ink, then it's dry, and then I can make notes right on the actual, like if I want to take a white pen and see, do I want to add some carvings here or there, I can do that right away because it's dried. Oil-based ink, on the other hand, it also has, the pros and cons, the opposite of what water-based ink is. It dries slowly. That's great because you can print for hours. Sometimes I'm printing for 3, 4, 5 hours on end, and I can just keep going with the same tools and the same ink that I've been using. Downside of that, you need to find a place for all these prints to dry. So when I'm doing a long printing session, I have prints all over the place. That's definitely a downside. It can take anywhere from days. Certain colors, like red, can take weeks to dry, and that, is not very fun if you have an event coming up that you want to sell those. That's definitely a huge downside. While the water-based ink has a thinner consistency, oil-based ink definitely a lot thicker. I think that makes it easier to get even coverage. So that's another advantage of oil-based ink. This Caligo brand, while most oil-based brands need solvents to clean, this Caligo brand is actually washable. That means soap and water can clean it up. So I'm able to just take this to the sink. I use a little fingernail scrub brush, get some Dawn dish soap, scrub it into all my tools, and then add water. And then it just rinses away, which is fantastic. And the other thing, Caligo has a few different mediums to give you more control. This is an extender. This is actually, it's not Caligo, but it's an oil brand tack reducer. And that just gives you more control. There's a lot more available on the oil-based side than I found for the water-based side. Okay, so now let's talk about what do the prints actually look like. So I have a few examples here. These are just some 3 examples of Speedball. So I mentioned I use Speedball for test prints. So it's not even on proper printmaking paper. This is just a drawing paper out of a sketchbook. And it's just a really quick print that I did to see if I wanted to do any further carving on this piece. But it gives you an idea of what this print can, or what this ink can look like. It can give you some pretty decent darks, but it's going to be really hard to get consistent prints. Some fading is fine and, in my opinion, desired when you're doing block printing, but this is quite a bit. And I found even with here's some. These weren't test prints. These were just, some prints from, this was from a class I did, and this is one print that I did quite a while ago. You're still getting a lot of patchiness. And one of the strange things that I find, with water-based ink, particularly Speedball, and I think this happens because the ink is thinner. And you probably can't see this on, let's see if I can zoom in. Okay, so I don't know if you can see it here, but on this turquoise area, so it's nice and dark here. Then you have this little line that's quite pale, and then a darker line, and then that's the edge. And I think that's because this is a thinner consistency. The water-based ink is a thinner consistency. So you end up with this strangeness to it. And I find it kind of throughout. So you can see, there's some patchiness there, but I can see, the darkness, then this light line, and then a dark line. Now, that's not the end of the world. Let me just zoom out again. It's not the end of the world. And to be honest, it's a nice looking print, I would say. It's not the most amazing design. It was very early on in my printmaking career that I made this, but it's not as consistent as I would like. The color itself, both colors I'd say are nice and vibrant, but not as rich as the oil-based ink. You can get a decent amount of detail. Like if I look at this one, I have, a little bit of detail here from the gloss or the shine of this little inkwell, and so I think that's pretty decent. But I just find generally, particularly with Speedball, water-based inks tend to be patchier and tend to have this strange issue of, just not having as even of coverage. Now I'm going to show you the Schmincke brand. So this is the Aqua Linoprint water-based ink. I found this was far better to work with, particularly if you're looking for the results, consistent results as an artist. Like if you want to sell your prints, you're going to get much more consistent results from this Schmincke brand. Now these are some really quick prints that I did a couple of years ago when I was doing Inktober. And I just wanted to use water-based ink because I just wanted to be able to do quick carving in the morning before I went to work and have a really, they'd be dry. I wouldn't have to worry about things cluttering up my workbench, and I could quickly clean things up and then head off to work. But what I found as I used them is I really didn't have the same issues as with Speedball. I'm going to zoom in just quickly again on this guy right here. So I don't know if you can see it on camera, but there is still a little bit on the end of this boat here. You can still see that there is a bit of that pushing. I don't know if it's pushing, but like this issue where it's dark and then it's light and then it's dark again. So there is still that issue a little bit with the Schmincke brand, but nowhere near as common or as often as on the Speedball brand. The other nice thing about the Schmincke is it's nice and smooth. When I feel the Speedball, it's super rough. Like it feels a little bit like sandpaper, whereas this is so nice and smooth. They must like mill the pigments and the binder quite a bit to get that nice smoothness. So that's really fantastic. But I found that I really did end up with a lot more patchiness than I do with the oil-based ink. This one This is a mixture of, I think, the ivory black and the cyan. And I remember printing this and not being able to get a nice, smooth, solid color for whatever reason. But you can get some solid colors. I mean, this snail's half decent. This was a knot. This one's half decent as well. These colors in this boat, they're half decent. Colors are vibrant, I would say. I mean, this is a decent color. This was a mix of the blue and the yellow. And this is, again, mixture of the blue and the yellow. So nice and fairly vibrant, I would say. But now let's take a look at the oil-based prints that I have. So I'll start with, let's see, I'll start with these two. These are fairly successful prints. This one I actually have packaged up to sell, which is why it's signed. And here you can see I was able to get quite even coverage. There's a tiny little bit of patchiness, but I think that that is the quality that I really like in block printing, is to get a tiny little bit of patchiness, but I don't want tons. And I find with oil-based ink, I can get far more consistent or more often a nice even color. I don't ever notice a real issue with that, you know, issue I had on the edge where the color ends. I've never noticed that in an oil-based ink. So that alone makes me lean towards using oil-based inks when I'm printing something to sell. I also find that the color itself is just richer. It's more luminous. It's just something that it just feels like it's coming off the page so much more nicely. There's nothing wrong with this. I mean, when you put them side by side, it's like, well, I mean, is there really a big difference? I mean, there is, I'd say, enough of a difference that the richness of the oil-based ink is my preference. This is another one that I did. This one I don't sell because I had a little bit of extra ink on the edge here and I smeared right here. But again, here, nice, consistent, solid color. The one thing that you can do with an oil-based ink that you can't really do with a water-based ink is I can add, this blue is actually just watercolor. So I print this, I let it dry for a week, and then I do just a little bit of watercolor detail. Other printmaking artists, they love to do watercolor throughout, whereas I usually just do a little accent. But that's something you can do with oil-based ink that you can't really do with water-based ink, because you might reactivate it and cause it to smear. Now I'm going to show you a couple less successful prints, because I talked a lot about patchiness with the water-based ink. So here's two that I wouldn't consider selling. So they're just in my my reject pile, I guess you could call it. You can get patchiness for sure. You can get uneven coverage for sure with an oil-based ink. But I find it's so much more consistent. You know, I don't know if I would ever be able to get this large of a surface area with a solid color with water-based ink as I can with oil-based ink. And I just wanted to show you those so that you're not necessarily expecting that, you know, the moment you move over to an oil-based ink, it's going to be, you know, perfect prints all the way, because I can tell you there are a lot of imperfect prints. And sometimes that imperfection is fantastic. I mean, this one's not that bad, but I think it's just maybe a little too patchy for my preference. I'd prefer this if it was a little bit closer to this, just in my opinion. So yeah, that's essentially my thoughts on water-based and oil-based inks. Definitely worth trying a bit of both. Be careful which oil-based inks you're buying, because if it isn't a washable ink, you're going to have to use solvents to clean it up. So just if you're in the store, just be sure to read the label so that you know what you're getting yourself into. But if you're just starting out, yeah, try Speedball. It's not that terrible. I mean, I think this is a pretty decent print. I just think if you can afford it and you have it available to you and you do want the advantages of a water-based ink, I mean, try the Schmincke brand, or maybe you have a different different artist quality brand that you have available to you.